after the hymn? You want me to go up
Yeah.
and then welcome people and then make the announcement after?
We'd like to sing a song while we're waiting for Barbara O'Neill to come in. If you'll open up your hymnals and turn to page 86, How Great Thou Art. This is a beautiful song. I actually had it sang at my wedding. I won't tell you how many years ago that was. The number is number 86. How great thou art. think because of the time, would it be all right if we just sing the first and the last verse? Is that okay, Barbara? Or okay. Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the world my hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. When Christ shall come with shout of acclamation and take us home, what joy shall fill my heart. Then I will bow in humble acclamation and there proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Amen. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you that may not know me, my name is David Morgan. I'm the pastor here at the Hayden Lake Seventh-day Adventist Church. We're grateful that you're here with us today. We're grateful to have Barbara O'Neill with us as well. I've been asked to give some good news. I've been made aware that she will be at the Sandpoint Seventh-day Adventist Church the week of October 11. So if you want a second dose, pun intended, you can attend the Sandpoint Seventh-day Adventist Church the week of October 11th. Is that true? That's the schedule. Okay, great. Well, again, we want to begin by prayer. We always do that with our service. I invite you to bow your head as we honor our Father in heaven. Our gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for your precious Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you for life, and thank you that Jesus is our great physician. We pray for your Spirit to be present here with us. Please, we ask, Lord, to be with Barbara as she speaks, and ask, Lord, that you'll be with us in our ears as we hear. May we discern your voice and follow you wherever you lead. And Father, we ask that you would lead us to eternal life with your Son, Jesus. And until that day he comes to take us home, we ask that you keep us faithful. May your love fill our hearts as we look forward to the coming of Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. Barbara, the time is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be having a look at a disease called arthritis. And what you can apply, or the symptoms you can apply and the treatments you can apply for arthritis, you can also apply to gout. My mother had rheumatoid arthritis, and she developed rheumatoid arthritis, I think she was in her early 40s, so I was only probably about 19 or 20 at the time. And when you're young, you never think you'll get sick. You don't think of sickness, but it wasn't long before my mother was wheelchair bound. And I was working at North Ryde Psychiatric Hospital at the time, and I was working in the surgical wing. And I saw some of the surgeries that they did to straighten out hands, because my mother's hands were all deformed like that. And so I told Mum and Dad, I said, if Mum went to this doctor, he could straighten her hands out. And she had the operation. It was very painful, but the hands weren't very much better. That's all I knew. Now, Mum and Dad continued on. My father's an inventor. He even invented a little fold-up wheelchair so he could take Mum around. For 6 years, Mum was a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis. And at about this time, I had moved north, and I moved to an area where Seventh-day Adventists live. I'd never heard of Seventh-day Adventists. And one of the girls that I got to know, she had a visitor, and this lady was in her 80s, and her name was Daisy. And she said, "You will love Daisy. You see, I'd just become interested in natural remedies." She said, "Daisy knows lots of natural remedies." And Daisy was the sweetest lady. And I told Daisy about my mum, and she said, "I think I can help your mum." So I rang my dad and I said, "Dad, I've just found a lady who thinks she can help Mum," because Mum had gone through all the drugs. She'd had gold injections. She'd been on so many drugs. Then she had to come off the drugs, and then she had the withdrawals of coming off the drugs. It wasn't a very nice journey. And here I met this lady who said that she believed she could help Mum. So I rang up my dad. Now, I'm about 2 hours north of Sydney at this time, and Dad's in Sydney. So he flew up to, I don't know if you know Brisbane, that's up in Queensland. So he flew up, he met Daisy and also the man that she worked with, and he was convinced, and my dad's not a Christian at all, but Daisy was a Christian. And he was so impressed with this couple, he said, "I think they can help Mum." So we took Mum up there. Remember, Mum's a cripple in a wheelchair. She'd lost a lot of weight, but her knees were swollen, her feet were swollen. And little by little, Daisy helped her. Daisy put her on juices. Daisy massaged her every day. Daisy put her in the sun. In fact, everything Daisy did is what we do at our health retreat now, but we'd had never heard of such things. Mum had been there a few weeks, and then I went up there. I had my little baby James and my little toddler Emma, so I was about 25 at the time. And I saw what Daisy was doing, and it was just thrilling for me to see. Daisy got my mum off all her medication. She got my mum pain-free. That was just incredible. But it was very difficult for my mum. She was so used to living like this. Daisy said to me, "I don't know what to do now, because I want your mum to start exercising," and she just sits and looks out the window. So Daisy said to my dad, I have done all I can for your mum. It's now her part to start doing some things to build up her body." And so Dad took Mum back home. And I think Mum knew that what else was there for her. And she started to deteriorate, and Dad didn't know what to do, so he put her into hospital. She was in the hospital 2 nights, and we got the word that she had died in the night. She was only 51 when she died. I was only 25. But, we were puzzled, and we almost think maybe Mum gave up the will to live. But I'm one of 5 children, and we all have inherited genes towards arthritis. So now I am way past the age that my mum died. I am now very much into everything that Daisy was into. Daisy has passed now. If Daisy was alive now, Daisy'd probably be about 120. But the whole family, my brothers and sisters, we were very challenged by this situation. My dad came back home and he changed his whole life. He became a vegetarian overnight. He went to a health retreat. He stopped coffee. He didn't ever drink and he didn't ever smoke, but he was quite a big meat eater. And then time went on and I got more and more into natural remedies, and that's how I got into natural remedies, is the influence of that experience with Daisy and my mum, and then also not wanting to give my children drugs. So I learnt more and more, and some of the things I use today are still things that I learnt from Daisy. And so as I'm moving on through my life, gaining more and more experience on the natural remedies, I was a single mum for 4 years. My first husband was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and it got very difficult. So the children and I were single for 4 years. And some say that must have been hard. I'll tell you, it was a lot easier than what we'd been living under. Anyway, my eldest daughter went to work in a health retreat in Queensland. And so after a year, the children and I went and moved up that area, and I started to work part-time in the health centre. And after a year, the business manager asked me to marry him. And I said yes. And then a year later, Michael said he wanted to start his own health retreat. So we've been married almost 25 years. In fact, 25 years in about another 2 weeks. And as I have been teaching and helping people, that is my best learning curve. And so I begin with this story to show you that the subject of arthritis is very close to home to me. And I'm always intrigued as to the why. I now know why my mum got rheumatoid arthritis. Because as the proverb said, it's Proverbs 26 verse 2, it says, "The curse causeless shall not come." In other words, no curse, no problem ever comes without a cause. There is always a reason. You see, that's Sir Isaac Newton's third law of motion. To every action, there's an equal and an opposite reaction. And we must always be scientific, because science basically is the way that the body runs. And so I'd like to take you through why my mum got arthritis and why I'm not a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis, considering I got similar genes to mum. And every now and then I get a little knock, just a little knock like that, and I say to my body, "I'm hearing you." And I know exactly what to do if I get that sore joint. Now, I touch there because that sometimes gets sore. And what you'll often find is a past injury. It can heal, but maybe 20 years later, that might be where arthritis might manifest itself. So arthritis is an inflammatory condition. So the next question is, what causes the inflammation? Earlier in the week, we looked at the acid-alkaline balance in the body. And the alkaline-forming foods and the alkaline or the lifestyle habits that create alkalinity are basically the best way to conquer arthritis. But if you don't know what's causing the acid, how can you do that? So I'd like to begin tonight by showing you what are the things that can cause acid alkaline? And I'd like to use my dear mum's story as an illustration. So looking at the 8 laws of health, which are called the true remedies, pure air. When you're breathing in bad air, when you're breathing in mouldy air, when you're breathing in stale air, you are not getting what pure air contains, which is oxygen. And every single cell in the body requires oxygen to give energy. So, number one, it's important to get pure air. I also noticed when Mum was at Daisy's house, she put her in the sunshine every day. When the sun's rays touch the skin, they convert a form of cholesterol just under the skin to vitamin D. And vitamin D is essential in the assimilation of calcium. And our bones are not made of calcium. Our bones are made of 12 main minerals and 64 trace minerals. That's what bones are made of. That's why calcium supplements will not help to strengthen bones. So what will help to strengthen bones? What strengthens bones is weight-bearing exercises. There's your rebounding on your trampolines. Also, those minerals, where do we find those minerals? In dark green leafy vegetables, and also in the Celtic salt, the Himalayan salt. You'll get that same balance and proportion of minerals. Most people are doing something which is what my mum was doing, and this brings to the third one. And what my mum was doing was something that she didn't realise. This is the law of temperance. To make it fit, I've split it into 2 bits. She was taking a lot of acid-forming foods. So what are the foods that have an acid effect? So the foods that have an acid effect on the body are the ones that have acid-forming minerals. So there's your chlorine and sulfur and phosphorus. These are the acid-forming minerals. And number one, I better make that look better. Number one is refined sugar. Now, Mum didn't eat a lot of refined sugar, but she loved her cups of tea, and every cup of tea she put a teaspoon of sugar. That's a metre of sugar cane. That's actually a lot. And she also loved sugar biscuits. And she'd often send me down the street when I was a little girl. I was the eldest girl. There's my brother, then me, then 3 younger sisters, to buy a cherry ripe. I don't know if you have cherry ripes in Australia. It's like a chocolate bar with coconut and sugar and cherries in the middle, something like that. Mum loved cherry ripes, so she was certainly getting the sugar. We had meat every night. I'm a 5th generation Australian, Scottish descent. Every night we had chops or sausages, mashed potatoes, frozen peas or beans every night of the week, except for Sunday, then Mum would cook a roast lamb. So we had meat every day. She was also having another acid-forming food, and that is the aged cheese. In fact, I think every meal we either had meat or cheese. When meat breaks down in the body, it leaves a high sulfur waste. So 58% of the meat that is eaten is burnt as fuel. So that leaves a 42% waste, and that waste is a sulfur waste. Dr. Colin Campbell, in his book, The China Study, he shows very clearly, he said he could switch cancer cells on and off by the amount of meat and dairy products he was feeding the rats. And it was because of this high sulfur waste, because cancer thrives in an acid environment. So what else Mum was having is she loved her cups of tea. So she would have been having, I'd say easy, 4 or 5 cups of tea a day, and every cup of tea had a teaspoon of sugar. And also, every cup of tea had some cow's milk in it. Now, raw cow's milk, straight from the cow, from an organic cow, that sits on at about the neutral. So that's neither acid or alkaline. But if the milk's coming from cows that are eating grass that's got DDT on it, was sprayed around the fences a few weeks ago or a few months ago, if the milk is homogenised and pasteurised, if the cow was also having antibiotics, did you know that 80% of the antibiotics that are made go to animals? And I was talking to an Irishman. I was in Ireland a couple of years ago giving meetings, and he was driving me around, and this gentleman was in his late 70s, so I heard lots of stories, and some of them were fascinating. He used to be a dairy farmer. So if he's in his 70s now, when was he a dairy farmer? He would have been a dairy farmer 40 years ago. He said, "I can't believe the amount of antibiotics we used to give the cows." I said, "Why did you give so many antibiotics to the cows?" He said, "Well, their udders were so full, the hooves would start to crack. And when the hooves started to crack, they'd get infected, so we were giving them antibiotics all the time." Now, that's 40 years ago. Whew. So caffeine is also acid-forming. The other acid-forming is, now Mum wasn't doing alcohol and tobacco, so I'm not going to write that down because we're just applying this to Mum. But she also had some grains that were acid forming. She ate a lot of wheat, she had a lot of bread, she had a lot of oats. That was really breakfast every day. So they also sit on the acid side. So without realising it, Mum was creating the very environment that was conducive for an inflammatory response. Something else that causes an acid environment, and we'll keep going through this. So number 4 is rest. Now, Mum wasn't guilty on this one. Mum used to go to bed early at night. Number 5 is exercise. Mum never exercised. Every day when I came home from school, my mum would be sitting watching the soap, we call them soapies. Is that what you call them? Soap operas? You know, Days of Our Lives, General Hospital, all that sort of stuff. Soapies, yeah. Soap operas, yeah. Mum didn't really do much exercise. The next law is diet. Well, we have looked at the diet. And the alkaline forming foods, and we'll put some alkaline forming foods here, and we're doing this as an object lesson. The alkaline forming foods have the alkaline minerals, which are sodium and potassium and calcium and magnesium and iron. Now, the foods that are highest in that in lemon, I can't really remember having lemon as a child, or very rarely. Dark green leafy vegetables. The only green that we used to eat was green peas, frozen. Well, they're not dark green leafy vegetables. And in the summer, if we were home from school on holidays, we'd have sandwiches for lunch and sometimes a salad. And the salad was always the white heart of the iceberg lettuce. So we really didn't eat dark green leafy vegetables. I didn't even know what spinach was. I didn't know what silver beet was. We never ever had them as children. So the other alkaline foods, vegetables. Now I'm going to put one list of vegetables over on this side, but not everyone they are acid forming for. But if someone has gout or arthritis, they certainly sit on this side, and that is tomatoes. And it's also capsicum or red pepper. I'm not going to put them there because we never ate that. And we never ate eggplant, aubergine, but we ate potatoes every single night. My father loved mashed potatoes, so that's what we had. Every night we had mashed potatoes. Except for Sunday when Mum did the roast lamb, there'd be baked potatoes. So I will put over here as a side point for your interest that your bell pepper and your eggplant, do you call it eggplant or aubergine? Eggplant. Now I'm putting it here as our object lesson for arthritis, because if you don't have arthritis and you enjoy this food, it's quite possibly perfectly fine. But if someone has arthritis, they must stop. So as I look at the list that my mum was eating, she was eating everything that was creating an environment for arthritis to get out of control. Many people are sick through ignorance. They don't realise what they're doing is creating this. So all the other vegetables are alkaline, but these can have an acid effect on some people. And they specifically would be people with an inflammatory situation in their body, and arthritis and gout are definitely inflammation. So for interest's sake, the grains that are alkaline, we never had. We didn't even know they existed. So this is millet, quinoa, buckwheat, Didn't even know what that was. Spelt, kamut, never heard of these things before. Also nuts. The nuts that are alkaline forming are almond and Brazil. We had almond and Brazil nuts once a year, Christmas Day. We had chicken once a year, Christmas Day. So this is in the 50s, very early 60s, that people traditionally only ate chicken at Christmas. But then when I was about 16, Kentucky Fried Chicken came to town. So I think Kentucky Fried Chicken was in the US long before Australia, is that right? Some might remember the time frame. All your other nuts do sit on this side. Your seeds all sit on this side. I don't think we ever ate seeds when I was a child. The human body can heal itself if it's given the right conditions. Without even realising it, my mum was giving her body all the conditions for this. The next one, number 7, is water. We're running out of room, so we're just going to write H2O. My mother never drank water. She only drank cups of tea. That's all she did. Now, something else that Mum had a lot of is headache tablets. Every day I used to see my mum pop headache tablets. And you know, as a child, you just think it's normal. If your parents do it, you just think this is what happens. So she was having, I think your common painkiller is Tylenol, is that right? Do you have ibuprofen? Okay, well, it wasn't them, but it was similar. Something like Beck's powders. Now that's back in the 60s just about. But that's also, all drugs are on the acid side. When Mum was 43, she was as me. And this is bringing us to the next point I'm going to put, is coming into trusting God. My father made a decision to move. We were in the house that I'd lived in all my life. Dad was a manager in a big factory, and he had a mate. I don't think you do that in America. You call your friend your mate, who owned a Shell service station. You call it a gas station? Do you have Shell here? Oh, okay. And so my dad decided to go into Shell service station. Now, my dad told me later that my mum did not want to go. She wanted to stay in her little town and just watch her soapies every day. But my dad wanted to do it, and so they did it. My mum never wanted to move. She never wanted to leave her friends, but she went along and did it. Now, by now, I'm psych nursing. I've left home, so I just had 2 younger sisters at home. The 3 eldest were working. And within 2 weeks of moving into the Shell service station, my mum developed pain. Within 6 months, she was in a wheelchair. Do you know, at the funeral, my mum's funeral, my dad took us all aside and told us that he believed that that was the reason that my mum had got arthritis. So can you see, this now comes in to that mental aspect of disease. In some diseases, the mental can take up a big part. In fact, there are whole books written where these authors claim that all disease begins in the mind. Now, I think in some cases it does, but each one of us is so different. Each one of us comes from different genes, different upbringing, different lifestyle. We are all so different, and that's why I believe we all should be our own doctor, because only you know how you feel, only you know what you have been through. So my mum was from the Victorian era. Now, I never heard my parents argue, but sometimes you could cut the air with a knife. And I can remember Mum was in the kitchen and she'd say, "Barbara, go and tell your father, So I'd run down to Dad and say, "Dad, Mum says, Well, does she? Well, you can just go and tell her." So I used to laugh. I used to think it was funny. I was running up and down telling Mum and Dad different things. But now that I'm older, I realise that Mum held her emotions in. She held her emotions in. And what she would do, she would just do the silent treatment. And, you know, the look that kills, all of that. And, of course, we also know that that is not good for the human body, because if you hold all that in, something's got to give. Isn't that right? Sooner or later. And so you can see how the stage was being set for what happened with my mum. A bit of genetics. Unbeknownst to her, she was laying all the foundation, and then the holding in of the resentment and the anger that she moved and she hadn't wanted to move. And now she's in this situation. You can have 10 people with arthritis, and some there'll be a major emotional aspect, and some there will be hardly an emotional aspect at all. And I do not like putting people into boxes. I do not like saying this is it or that is it. I like to look at it. So if someone comes to our retreat and they've got a whole pile of tests from specialists, doctors, blood tests, I just sort of scoop it aside and say, "I'm interested in you. I'm interested in your childhood. I'm interested in if you had any sickness. I'm interested in I'm interested when this first started." And they're a little taken back at first because they're looking at all their tests, and certainly the tests can give a little bit of an indication. But I also know that you can have a test one day, and then a week later, by the way, when you have that test, you didn't have a good sleep last night, and you didn't have enough water to drink today, and oops, you forgot to eat breakfast, and oh, you've just had some bad news. What are the blood tests going to look like? And then a week later, you go and have another blood test, you're able to have a good night's sleep, you've drank all your water, you ran up and down hills this morning, you had a really good breakfast, and life's good because we've just booked a holiday to, I don't know where you can go for a holiday nowadays, but anyway. Forget Australia. Australians aren't even allowed to go to the beach at the moment. Whew. And can you see that blood test can look quite different? Now, I do know that some tests can give an indication, absolutely, and sometimes blood tests can give an indication, but I like to look more at the person. I like to look more at their history. So just for a few minutes, I'm going to take you a bit into Mum's history. Mum was the youngest of 5 children. They had 4 children, and then 7 years later, my mum was born. Now, what happens when that happens? It's the little princess, is that right? The little princess in the family. And so my mum grew up never having to work, never having to do anything, because she was just a sweet little princess. And so and I can remember as a child, we kids did all the work. You know, my room was the lounge room, David's room was the kitchen, and Fiona's room was the back veranda, and we did all the dishes. Mum never did dishes, and I never thought about it as a child. No, I think it's a good idea for kids to do dishes, actually. I think it's important that kids help. But I realise now that Mum didn't do anything. So you see, as you get older and you start to analyse, you start to investigate how these things happen. And I certainly love my mum, and I certainly was very sad when she went. But I have to tell you that when she did pass, we all breathed a sigh of relief, because it was, you know, you can imagine, and I have much mercy on my poor mum who had hands and limbs that just wouldn't work. And so it is with great delight, and I believe to my dying breath, I will do what I am doing And I know that my mum would be overjoyed to know that I am able to help people overcome their arthritis. And we have seen so many people totally overcome their arthritis. Isn't that great news? So where do you start? You start with these true remedies. That's where you start. And little by little, I believe they're the mirror. And you look in that mirror and you can see, yes, I'm doing that. I love these foods. Well, how much do you love your arthritis? And it's not forever. Let me tell you the story of one lady. She came to our retreat. She said, I have a story for you. She said, I'm 73. She said, when I was 65, my husband and I booked ourselves into an aged care facility. She said, I had arthritis. She said, I love knitting and playing the piano, and I couldn't do that anymore, and it was getting harder to tend the garden. So my husband and I, and he had a few aches and pains, and we were both a bit overweight, so we booked ourselves into an aged care facility. When we booked in, and it was just like a little unit, it had a little tiny garden, self-contained unit, their daughter gave them a set of my DVDs. So at night they'd watch the DVDs, and they learnt about the 8 laws of health. And as they're listening, they said, do you know, we could do this. We're both retired. So what they started to do was they started to have a little bit of a garden, and they could be outside every day. They learnt about the dangers of some of the things they were eating, and especially with her arthritis. So they made a decision to stop all this. They made a decision to start eating more fruits and vegetables, and it was a lot easier. Where does fruit sit? Fruit as a whole has an alkaline effect, and so unless someone has a yeast presence in their body, then the sugar in the fruit can feed it. So they totally changed their diet. They decided to become plant-based. They got to know how to do the legumes. They started to have 2 meals a day, and because they were retired, they had their main meal at 9 and they had their other meal at 3 in the afternoon. They found that very easy. And also having the breakfast at 9, it allowed them to do a little work in the garden, especially in the summer months before the heat of the day came. They started to go to bed earlier. They started to do some gentle exercise, and it was easy now to drink water that they weren't drinking their teas and coffees. They loved God very much already, but they never realised the effect of the body on the mind, and we're going to be looking directly at that tomorrow when we go to the mind. After 6 months, they both noticed that they'd lost weight. They'd both lost, in fact the lady lost more, but she was carrying a bit more. I think she lost something like 30 pounds in 6 months. The man lost weight. Without them almost realising it, the lady started to notice her hands weren't hurting anymore. She started to play the piano a little bit more. And as time went on, after a year, the lumps on her hands were going down. They were starting to feel good. They looked at each other and said, what are we doing in this aged care facility? They booked out of the aged care facility. They bought a motorhome. You call it an RV, is that right? They bought like a motorhome, and they decided to travel around Australia. And they got up to mid-north New South Wales, which is where Misty Mountain Health Retreat is. They drove in, they booked in for a week at Misty Mountain Health Retreat. And the whole week they were there, the lady just had this smile on her face. She said, I'm in my early 70s now, and she said, I have to tell you, I feel better now than I felt in my 50s. She totally conquered her arthritis. They heard the information and they just implemented it. And she said to me, do you think I could start eating a little bit more tomato? And I said, you can try. Who'll tell her? Her body will. So what she found is she could have half a tomato 3 days a week. And her body said, I can handle that. She said she still couldn't handle a bell pepper, so they left that. She said her husband loves potatoes, but he has twice as much as she has, but she just keeps it at a smaller amount. She said Eggplant, they might have it once a month or something like that. And her body said, yeah, I can handle that. It's important to listen to the first whisper. Because if you don't listen to the first whisper, the body will little by little start screaming. And when the body starts screaming, that's when it starts doing damage. And I know with my mum, when she first started to get her pains in her hands, she went to the doctor who gave her some anti-inflammatories. And then as it got worse, then he put her on prednisones and cortisones. Well, drugs never heal. They never heal. In the little book, Ministry of Healing, the author says, let the physicians teach the people that restorative power lies not in drugs, but in nature. Is that right? Yeah, we've got a body. We looked at the immune system the other night. What an incredible immune system that we have. It's got everything that we need to be able to heal. But when you keep silencing the knock, this is what drugs do. There's the knock. What a drug does, what's still happening? It's still knocking, but you can't hear it. And then the damage begins. I stayed in a home recently that had a little 2-year-old. And the little 2-year-old would say, Mum, yes, in a minute. Mum, what's happening after 10 minutes? The child's screaming. And I'm sitting there thinking, go to him. So you see it with children. My babies hardly ever cried. You know why? Because when I heard the first whimper, I'd tend to it. And think of that with also the body. Listen to the first whisper. Because your body's trying to tell you something. Here's the simple way. It's cold. We call it a woolly jumper, but you call it a sweater. Is that right? Yeah. You put a sweater on. It's getting hot, you take it off, and they're very simple things that we do. If it's itchy, you scratch it, but as you'll see in my next presentation on the skin, there's a far better thing you can do than scratching it. Isn't that good news? So you listen. You must listen. And you might be aware of the old sayings, you've got to nip it in the bud. You've got to get to it before it gets big. Or another old saying is a stitch in time saves 9. You know those old sayings. I make sure all my kids know the old sayings because they're almost getting lost. Do you know what I think it is? So many homes today, there's so much time doing this that there's not as much time dialoguing. And so the older people aren't sitting around telling stories. So please, in your home, turn the devices off and get the stories out. When I was 25, the old lady next door told me about the cooked onion poultice, and we looked at that with the immune system and how that helps the earache. Wow, she's long gone now. So a lot of the people in their 80s now, they are past the era that use the natural remedies. I'm just very glad that there are books that contain this information. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to make a list of what you can do to conquer arthritis. We'll define it. What we want to do is create in a body an environment that is conducive for getting that inflammation down. So we're going to come again to our 8 laws. Make sure you're breathing in fresh air. Make sure you're having sunshine every day. So stop all the acid-forming foods. They must stop. If you don't turn the tap off, you're still going to be mopping up in the other corner. Number 2, the alkaline diet. Now, it doesn't have to be a totally alkaline diet, but try and aim for about 80% alkaline. In my book, Self-Heal by Design, I have a list of acid alkaline in the body. So 80% alkaline. What would be the acid? Well, something like chickpeas or walnuts or pecans, they are acid, but you need a little acid. Now, what can be incredibly helpful, we'll go with this alkaline. There are some drinks that are very alkalizing, and I know this is what Daisy did to my mum. She gave her a juice. And for people who have arthritis, it's not a bad idea to do, say, a couple of days juice fast. But because my mum was so thin, so what I'm about 100 pound, I think my mum got down to about 70 pound. And because my mum was so thin, she didn't want to fast her, so she would supplement with the juices. And the main juice that she used was 80% carrot and 10% apple and 10% celery. This is called the vegetarian's milk. I met a lady who gave this to her baby instead of milk. Her baby had a skin disease. The baby could not handle any milk, not even goat's milk, not her milk. And the naturopath put the baby on this formula, and the baby went very well. So that's a very alkalizing juice, is that one. So the person can be having 2 or 3 of those juices a day. But they must never take the place of water. So where would you have it? My suggestion is when you wake up in the morning, remember the formula I gave you the other day? I wake up in the morning, have half a glass of water, go to the bathroom, another half glass of water, get dressed, another half glass of water, pray, another half glass of water, read my Bible, glass of water. So by the time I run up and down the hills in the morning, I've had sometimes 3 glasses of water, come back, another glass of water, we'll have half a glass, have the salt, put the breakfast on, have the other half glass, and then, so you've had quite a bit. So what you might do is have 2 or 3 glasses of water, over the half hour after you wake up, and then have the juice. A good time is half an hour before your meal. If you have it just before your meal, it can stop your appetite. But you can have it, say, half an hour before the meal. So you might have it half an hour before breakfast, half an hour before lunch, and maybe have it in the evening, because we were talking about the time-restricted eating, breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper. And the couple I told you about that came to our retreat, they were having their breakfast at 9 and then their main meal at 3 or 2 or 3. So if you do that, then you might have the juice at maybe 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Another very alkaline juice is green drinks. In my book, in the acid alkaline chapter, I've got a recipe for the great green drink, I call it, and we do it at our retreat, and we gather wild greens, all your edible greens, usually about 4 at a time. Could be stinging nettle, yes, it's a great green, that one, and you don't have to eat the stinging nettle. When we put the stinging nettle into the blender with water, when it's blended, then we strain it, so you're not eating the stings. You're just getting the minerals out of it. See, they're very, very high minerals in that, and your minerals are alkalizing. And the green drinks, all your green leafy vegetables, are very, very high in their alkaline minerals. So what some people choose to do is buy chlorophyll drops and maybe have that a few times a day. They might buy green barley powder or barley green powder. You can buy super greens. So there's a few options, but I put them under the alkalizing list because remember, we want to bring about a more alkaline environment into the body. Number 3, hydration is essential. I find that many people that come to our retreat with arthritis are dehydrated. And a lot of people, especially elderly people, they don't want to drink a lot of water in case they have an accident. So what I suggest with this is just a few mouthfuls every few minutes, few mouthfuls. You see a huge amount of water goes into the body, guess what? It's not long before a huge amount of water is going to come out. Drinking like that, you are more likely to have accidents, but just having little bits all through the day, and you can get quite a lot of water into you just by having those little bits all through the day. But also, so we're looking at, and we talked about this the other day, 25 kilo of body weight Oh, sorry, I'm in the US, got to go to the pounds. So 50 pound body weight would equal 4 glasses, and they're 8-ounce glasses. So that's your rule of thumb. It's nice to know that to get a bit of an idea also on how much to give children. So also the salt. Remember the whole salt? The whole salt, which is your Himalayan salt or your Celtic salt. Himalayan has 75 minerals and your Celtic salt has 82 minerals. So this is of the utmost importance. And also your de-stress. So anyone who has any illness, they need to also seriously address the stress aspect of things. There's some lovely verses that I call alkaline verses in the Bible. One's Isaiah 26, verse 3, where the Bible says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, he whose mind is stayed on God, because he trusts in God." That's a very alkaline verse. And 1 Peter 5, verse 7, the Bible says, "Cast all your care upon him, for he cares for you." And I love the verse, there's a lot of verses I love, 1 Thessalonians 5:18, "In everything give thanks." So the advice for Mum when she was moving, the advice for me, the advice for anyone, is if you do have to move, you can say, "Thank you, Father in heaven. I don't quite like it, but I know out of this I'm going to learn something, or I'm going to achieve something that I would never have achieved." So my life is constantly changing directions, constantly. So 2.5 weeks ago, when I flew from Italy to Frankfurt, and I went to fly from Frankfurt to the US, they said, "You can't get on the plane. We only accept American citizens." I said, "I have a daughter in America." "Oh, okay. How old is she?" 43. No, it would only count if she was 25. No. Well, what'll I do? Go to the service desk. So my life is constant adjustments. And then I'm staying in a hotel not far from the airport, not knowing at any moment where I'm going to happen. And then I find out if you go to Mexico, there might be a chance that you'll get back into the US. So change direction again to Mexico, Cancun, into Mexico. For 2 weeks in Mexico, not knowing if I'm going to be able to get back in here. And so I took the Bible advice, and you know what that is? You just take one day at a time. Just one day at a time. Live one moment at a time. And I got to know the staff, and I found a little Italian restaurant with the loveliest guy, and they treated me like a queen, and they would make anything I wanted. And can you see? And then my iPad crashed. So I went and found a shop, and there was this young guy who got it ready for me, because not many people can speak English, and I'd go home and realise I didn't know what to do. So back day, I'd go next day. Anyway, they greeted me. "Oh, here's Barbara again." "Oh, yeah." Because I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know very much about this." But can you see what I'm saying? You just make the most of where you are, the most of what you've got. And the Bible says that I have learnt in all cases that I am in to be content. So if you thank God for every single moment, then past pain fades and future worries don't seem so bad. Now, I left home on the 2nd of April, and I don't know if I'm even going to get home. But you know what? I don't even think about that. I just love this moment. I'm loving all my new friends. It's nice outside when it's dusk. What an incredible body we're living. And this is what God wants us to do. In everything, give thanks. So this helps very much with de-stressing. And take note from the children. Because you know what children do? They laugh 125 times a day. And so the verse for that is Proverbs 17:22, "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine." Learn to laugh. What else can you do? So when I just dived in the creek after digging in the garden, because I was the gardener in 2020, and I'm just got my sarong on, got my dirty clothes going up to the house, slipped and fell in the mud. And all mud everywhere, man. What do? You just laugh. Isn't that true? You just laugh. Yeah, go back in the water, wash the sarong, put my dirty clothes back on. Because life should be good. And happiness is not things. Happiness is a state of mind. That's a very important part of de-stressing. Now, there are some herbs. And one of the best anti-inflammatory herbs that we have is turmeric. And until the lifestyle kicks in to help reduce the pain in the hands, turmeric. And you can be having even up to 6,000 milligrams a day. It's very safe, will not hurt you. But don't depend on that. Remember, that's just going to take the edge of it until the laws kick in. I was reading the book, it's called The Gift of Pain by Dr. Paul Brand. It was given to me in Italy. So that's what I read while I was in Mexico. Fascinating book. And he was giving the story about how he had gallstones. And I don't know if you've ever had them, but they're very, very painful. But he was so busy, he couldn't get the operation yet. He's a doctor himself. And so he'd wake in the night in terrible pain. He'd get out, he'd have his pyjamas on, and he was working in a hospital in India, and their paths are crushed shells. So he'd walk barefoot on the paths, and it'd take his mind off this pain. Do you know, diversion is a wonderful thing. You've just hit your finger and it's so sore, and you hear a crash and the tree's just fallen on your car. You hardly even think of your finger, isn't that right? Diversion is a wonderful thing, and tomorrow we're going to look at the laws of the mind, and diversion is one of the laws of the mind. Distraction. So you can certainly use that with your pain. You concentrate on that pain, I can tell you it'll be twice as bad. Sing, go for a bike ride, walk on crushed shells. The other herb that can help a lot, and this is in the poultice form, is ginger poultices. And we have seen this help with many people with painful joints. What you do is you grate fresh ginger. And you grate fresh ginger, you have a cloth. Let's say I have a very sore wrist. No, for a sore wrist, we're going to do a bigger cloth. A sore wrist, you have a cloth that big. And remember, you can tear up your old tea towels, your sheets that are starting to tear apart. And you grate the ginger in the middle. And what you would grate in the middle, the amount of ginger would be about a teaspoon. It's quite wet, so you can spread it out. You can spread it like you'd spread peanut butter on bread. You spread it out. And then you pull this over, I call it east, west, north, south. And so now you are left with a little package. And so that will come down to a package that'll be about this big. And one side will have all the layers, that's the top side, and the side that will touch the skin is the single layer. And you lay it over, and then you cover that with plastic and bandage it on. Now, if there's a lot of inflammation in that joint, within half an hour, the skin will get very hot. One lady said, "My skin's burning." I said, it actually isn't burning. It feels very hot. If it's too uncomfortable, take it off. But what that heat on the skin means is that the inflammation is being drawn out of the joint. And I always say to people, yeah, skin's burning, but how does your joint feel? And they go, oh, actually, it's moving a little bit because the inflammation has been drawn out. Most pain is due to inflammation. And a man told me this story. He said, I had gout in my second toe next to my big toe. So he said, I put a little ginger poultice on it. And he said, it got very hot and the pain went, but then it seemed to go into my next toe. So I put a ginger poultice on that toe overnight, and it went, and then it went to the next toe. And it seemed to jump the toes. I said, did it go to the next foot? He said, no. One lady told me she had a very sore knee and she put the ginger poultice on. And she said she had it on for about 5 hours in the afternoon. And she said it got very, very hot, but my knee felt good. It could move a bit. So after my shower, I put another ginger poultice on, and I had that one on all night. And she said, and then in the morning, I had a shower, washed it off, put another ginger poultice on, and then in the middle of the day, she took the poultice off, and her skin was bright red and blistering. She said, what have I done? And I laughed. I said, you've overdone it. I said, it will not hurt you. You just can't do another ginger poultice until that skin settles down. You see, it drew so much inflammation out that it irritated the skin. So what do? My suggestion is you do a ginger poultice for a couple of hours in the afternoon and then take it off. Now, we usually do it in the afternoon at the retreat, and so by the time they're going to bed, we say to the person, how does it feel? And if they go, oh, it's a bit hot, well, we'll take it off. And if sometimes they say, oh, I feel so good, can I please leave it on? We say, sure. But you don't do it all the next day. So don't overdo it. So you might do it for a couple of hours, and then what you can do overnight, and this can certainly be very soothing, is the castor oil compress. So the castor oil compress, it can be used again and again and again. And with the castor oil compress, I'm going to put this sideways. So what you'll do with the compress, there'll be a few layers of cloth. If it's old toweling, it might just be 2 layers. And if it's sheeting, you might have 4 or 6 layers. And then you pour the castor oil on, and it'll make like a bubble on top. It is so thick. So you just sit that there for maybe 10-15 minutes till it soaks through. And when it soaks through, it'll come out a little bit further. And then when you apply it to the skin, the heat of your body will thin the oil a little bit more, and it'll come out a bit more. And you cover that with plastic, and you bind that to the area. And because it is a compress, it's just a vehicle to hold the oil to go into you. Castor oil penetrates deeper than any other oil. It can break up scar tissue, it can break up bone spurs. So it's very good at arthritis and that inflammatory condition there. So my suggestion is castor oil every night. You don't want to put too much on because you don't want leaking castor oil through the sheets. It's not a happy situation. You might find after a couple of nights it's getting a little dry, then you'll put maybe another teaspoon of castor oil on. And usually you can use the same compress for even a month. And might be looking a bit sad then, so you'll make a fresh one. Whereas the ginger poultice, being grated fresh ginger, that needs to be discarded after every use. So these are different things that you can do to bring relief until the lifestyle and the diet kicks in. Ooh, my time is very much up. So we'll just give a few minutes for any questions relating to arthritis, and then we'll have a break. Yes?
What about the spine?
What about the spine? If there's arthritis in the spine, you can certainly apply these poultices to the spine. And often your clothes, now if it's a lady, her bra, her underwear can often hold it in place. But you know, in the chemist, or you can even make this a strip with Velcro on it that closes, because especially ladies, you know, we go in at the waist, and if you're bandage something on, it keeps slipping up to the waist, so it's not easy to bandage the torso. Plus, you don't want to be tight around your digestion, and as we have heard, you don't want to inhibit your diaphragm and breathe with your abdominal muscles, so you don't want too much restriction in that area, but it's actually the only way you can apply it to the spine. What about exercise? Oh dear, who forgot that? Absolutely exercise. Now, if someone's got arthritis, no jarring. So someone's got arthritis, swimming is very good. The rebound is good because you've got shock absorber, and in some places the exercise bike can work. But with the arthritis, these 8 laws must be implemented, and exercise certainly is in there. Yeah?
There are a lot of water purifiers out there, and we bought an alkaline water purifier. Is that worth the expense, or?
So what sort of purifier?
Yeah, it's a Chanson.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Alkaline water.
Alkaline water. Okay, yes, very good question. Now that's a few $1,000s, am I right? Now, just what could you do for a few $1,000s? You could come to Living Springs Retreat for a week. Now, if you've got it, use it. But one lady rang me up and she said, we've got an alkaline water machine because we do like eating acid-forming food. Your best alkalizer is what I've shown you here. Can you see that? And you can alkalize water with a squeeze of lemon. You can alkalize water with a little pinch of salt. But if you have an alkaline water machine, use it. Yes?
I have 2 questions. Number 1, have you heard of black seed oil?
Yeah, black seed oil, yes.
Yeah, I've heard that also does pretty good on painful joints if you rub that on.
Okay, that's worth a try.
Another thing that I also understand is sour cherry juice.
Sour cherry juice.
It can help remove uric acid from the joints. I know a gentleman who had gout so bad, he swore he was going to amputate his feet. He bought a pound of cherries, ate them, and he peed like a racehorse all night. The next day, the gout was gone.
Yeah, well, worth a try. Cannot hurt. We'll just take this one last question, we'll have a break.
Barbara, the herbs and the compresses, can those be equally used for like tendinitis, things like that?
Yeah, wherever you've got inflammation, you can use the ginger. Remember this, ginger's specifically for joint.
Okay.
Whereas for tissue inflammation, the potato is good. Now, if you're not sure what to do, try potato.
Right.
A few hours later, try ginger. Your body will tell you what
I heard
it
you
likes.
talking in one of your videos on YouTube about comfrey when you hurt your shoulder or something. So compress
So
also?
the comfrey, not everyone has comfrey, not everyone can get comfrey, but comfrey is certainly reduces inflammation. But for inflammation in the joint, nothing equals the ginger. Okay, so we'll have a break and we'll come back at 6:30. Yep, so that's a 15-minute break.
popular. Yes.
My friend is asking about DVDs.
The back.
No.
I'll tell him. Okay, I've got voice. That's good. We had a few hiccups, but we're here. Now, there's been a few questions about DVDs. Now, I do have a set of DVDs. It's 13 hours. That's 6 DVDs, and it's $100. If you give your name and the $100 to the lady up at the desk, we will post them to you. So that's what you can do for the DVDs. So now we're going to be looking at skin diseases. So let me begin with a story, because I think a story illustrates. We had a young man from Saudi Arabia come to our program. And he was 40, came with his wife. He was Asian. And he had had eczema as a child. It had developed further into psoriasis. And as I heard his story, I found it very interesting. He said that all his life he'd put cortisone on it. And the cortisone stops the pain and the itch, but then when it wears off, it usually comes back far worse, so they just keep putting it on. And he got to the point where he noticed that it was far worse if he didn't put it on, but it wasn't really doing a lot, so he Googled, searched, and he found a website called Cortisone-Induced Eczema. So the very drug that he was taking to bring relief, because it will never cure. And I think everyone knows that. It just brings a bit of relief, but it will never cure you. And it actually makes it worse. So this young man who'd been using cortisone for 20 years, now it was causing it. And there was a German doctor residing over the website, and he said, there's only one way out of it. You've got to bite the bullet and just stop. You're going to go through living hell for several months, but eventually the body will realise it's not getting its drug back, and it will start to recover. And so he said to me, I've been through the worst. I haven't taken any for 3 months. The back of his neck was like crocodile skin. And he had little patches here and there of eczema, and he'd be scratching here and there. So his story was interesting. Also in Saudi Arabia, he worked on the oil rigs out to sea. There are big housing complexes for all the staff there and all the people that work there. And it's so hot there that they have air conditioning units. And if the air conditioning units aren't running at their optimum, because of the moisture there, mold can grow. And his wife told me that the filter that's on their air conditioner gets black. And she said, the filter's supposed to last 3 months, and she said, I'm changing it every week. So there's another thing, is there's a mold factor. And she said she has a friend, and they got up into the roof of their house, and it was all mouldy. So you got that hot sun beating down, you've got that moisture in there, and of course that's where mold growth can go. So allergy. The skin is reacting. It's having an allergic reaction to something. And some of the things that can have an allergic reaction to are mold. And some of the time the reaction can be to chemicals. And sometimes the reaction can be to foods. Sometimes it's a little bit of all of this, and sometimes it's one of those. So it's a matter of eliminating the cause. And so I could see there was a mold factor with this guy. But also, he was eating a lot of, are we ready for it? Have you heard of these before? The peanuts, the dairy, and the hybridized wheat. I think we've heard this before. And the oats and the refined sugar. These are the 5 most common allergens. So he went through the program. He enjoyed the juicing days. He enjoyed the food very much. He learned how to cook legumes. He had the steam bath every night. We have a steam sauna hut by the creek. It's wood-fired. You go into the steam sauna hut, you get very hot, and then you dive in the mountain stream and back in the steam sauna. You might see in the back of my book there's an ad for Misty Mountain Health Retreat, and there's a girl scooping the water up in her hands. That's our water. It's just crystal clear. Beautiful water. So he very much enjoyed Misty Mountain Health Retreat, very different to Saudi Arabia. When I'm consulting them at the end, he said, "We are disappointed." I said, "Yes." He said, "My rashes are still here." I said, "That's right, and they will be." I said, "Because even though you've had none of these foods for 2 weeks, it can take at least 2 months to get it out of the body." "Okay," he said. I think he felt disappointed because they'd spent a lot of money coming to the retreat, especially he and his wife, and the fares there. You know, our disappointments are equal to our expectations, aren't they? But I knew that very soon he would get relief. And at 6 weeks, now 2 weeks and 6, what's that? There's your 2 months. He emailed me, he said, "It's gone." He said, "It's totally gone. I don't have a spot." Exactly 1 year later, he booked in to the retreat for them to do another 2 weeks. They so enjoyed their stay there. Do you know, before the lockdown, 1/3 of our guests were from overseas. And I looked at his skin, it was as mine. He said to me, "My specialist told me I would never be free of this." He said, "My specialist's children have it." Wow, is it that simple? Do you know, it is that simple. But what is also important, and I think we've done this before too, pure air. Now, can you see what was happening with this man? He was not getting the pure air. Their air conditioner was mouldy, so he was breathing. So there's a factor. Can you see here there are different factors? There are a lot of little threads that come together to make a strong rope. And a strong man can try and break that rope, but he cannot. And then a little tiny mouse can come along and start nibbling at the threads. That little mouse that the man could stomp on with his big boot and kill in a moment could break the rope. And I find with many people who are not well, it's all these little threads. That's why I like the detective work. I think I'll have to put my why down here. Why? There is always a reason. The curse causeless doesn't come. So there was a factor. And then the food. Now there are some people that eat all these foods and they don't have eczema. So can you see there's different factors that are coming into it? But sometimes something like that will tip the scales. Sunshine. Now if someone has eczema and they put it in the sun, the heat from the sun can make the itch even worse. Is that right? So you've got to play with that one. One lady told me that her little 10-year-old daughter had eczema, and they went and had a holiday by the sea for 1 week. And the little girl ran in along the beach in the sunshine, dived in the sea, the salt water, and her eczema it improved so much. So number 3 is temperance. I list these again because these are the true remedies. And many people are taking into their body things that they do not realise can be bad. And they don't realise they can be bad for the body because they ate them 10 years ago and they didn't have the problem. Do you often see that reasoning? And the same with this man. He said, I was eating that 10 years ago and I didn't have a problem. Well, actually he did. Remember, he had the problem for 20 years. But he might say, well, look at my mate. Look at my friends. They eat it and they don't have eczema. So how could it be? How could it be the food? Well, sometimes one thread can be a genetic thread. My sister, when she was born, I was so excited to see my little sister, and when I looked at her, I was shocked. Her whole face was covered in eczema. In fact, I was so embarrassed I didn't want anyone to see my baby sister because her whole face was covered in eczema. She had, well, she's, of course, I think she's 60 this year. So she had 4 children, and the 3rd child, severe eczema. So you see, some people will get the gene and some people will not. It's the genetic code. Some will have it and some won't. My father had asthma. And I remember he had this glass bulb a rubber bulb with glass tubing. This is 50s, puffers, and a little cork. And then my younger sister, the sister I'm just telling you about, she had eczema, and then that cleared up, and she had asthma. Do you find that? Sometimes it's one or the other. And all her life, she flipped from eczema to asthma. My 5th child had asthma. See how it's interesting, the genes that come through. But none of my children have ever had eczema, and I think part of it is because I did not feed them food till quite late. And that certainly can affect the allergy response, because the gut also plays a part. So the temperance is not taking anything that will harm it. Many people don't realise. I think most people are very much aware that the alcohol, the drugs, the cigarettes, they all play a role. So the next one is rest. And I'd like to show you something a little bit more about rest, because this plays a huge part. You might be aware that there are times in our night where our eyes are flicking, and the researchers have shown that when the eyes are moving fast, the brain's moving fast, and when the eyes are not moving fast, the brain's not moving fast. So what they did, where they called the rapid eye movement time, rapid eye movement, and the non-rapid eye movement time, non-rapid eye movement time. And they find that what they do is they have periods of rest and periods of work, and they come in 90-minute cycles. So let's have a look at it. Let's do the 8 hours from 9 to 10:30. So from 9 to 10:30, this is when non-rapid eye movement is very active. So what happens in non-rapid eye movement time? This is a courier system. This is taking the short-term memory, which all happens, is stored in the hippocampus, up to the top of the brain. The top of our brain is called the cortex, and right in the middle is the long-term storage unit. So the courier service is happening in the first hour and a half of the night. What also is happening is a cleaning system. It's just like in the cities, when everyone's asleep, that's when the city streets are cleaned, is that right? This is what's happening in your brain. So what's cleaned up? waste from neuronal activity, waste from the combustion of oxygen and glucose at the cellular level, bit of cleaning to happen. Now, non-rapid eye movement at this time takes up about 80%. But at this time, rapid eye movement time, it only takes up 20%. So what's happening in rapid eye movement time is there's your dreaming. So if you wake at midnight, you don't usually remember your dream compared to in the morning, because as you'll see, the dreaming time is much more in the morning. Also, what's happening there is a filing system. And this filing system is very interesting because remember your short-term memories being taken up to your long-term memory unit in your cortex, and it's all filed. I read a book on this called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. He's an atheist. And you know what he said when he's talking about this? It's almost as if sleep has an intelligence. And I said, yeah, it has, mate. It's called God. Because it's not put in any haphazard way. It's in a certain order. And they believe the dreaming helps to know how to put it in order. What also happens in rapid eye movement time is this is where you have a confirmation. Now, what do I mean by confirmation? Everything that you're learning through the day, if you go to sleep and have your full 8 hours, you've got a consolidation or a confirmation or a settling in of the things you've learnt through the day. Also, here are your inventions. But what is interesting is, I'm going to draw it another way to make it easier to understand. We're going to look at non-rapid eye movement time and rapid eye movement time. So first of all, we look at 9 to 10:30. You've got 80% non-rapid eye movement and you've got 20% rapid eye movement. So the next hour and a half is 10:30 to 12, sorry. There's 60, 40. So now we're going from 12 to 1:30, 50-50. And then we're going from 1:30 to 3. And you've got 40, 60. And then you've got 3 to 5. And there you've got 20% non-rapid eye movement and 80% rapid eye movement time. So this explains so much why we need to sleep. So if someone's going to bed at midnight every night, can you see that they're missing out on some of their courier? They're missing out on some of their cleaning system. And what happens is your short-term memory unit isn't properly emptied. It's still got some in from the day before. Can you have your 8 hours from midnight to 8 a.m.? No, it doesn't do the same. Have you heard the old saying that an hour before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight? And you've heard the old saying, we should, what's early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. But it also shows how to get these full 8 hours, you need that for your full healing, no matter what the problem. No matter what the problem. And so 8 hours is really a not negotiable. So the choice is this, and I'm so glad that God gives us choice. Here's your choice. 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Sorry, you won't be able to do that tonight. 9 to 5, that's my favourite. Or 10 to 6 at a stretch. Because those early hours is where most of your cleaning is happening. And that's right. And it also explains so much as to why the sleep is so important. And sleep has never been as much a problem as it is today. Do you find that? Many people can't sleep, and there is a reason why they can't sleep, and that is because they're going to bed too late. It's also, and why are they going to bed too late? If I get a lady in her 60s who goes to bed at midnight, what's she doing? What would keep you up till midnight? A pity it would be praying, but I'm afraid it's not. Something is stimulating the mind, because when the sun goes down, our body starts winding down. So what stops it winding down? Well, the sunshine has blue light. And they have found that there are receptor sites on the eye that absorb the blue light. It's called melanopsin, and it's involved in brain function. It increases tactical reasoning, the ability to solve mathematical problems. So that's why it's important for us to have sunshine every day. Now, when you allow your eyes to see those computer screens after the sun goes down, there is blue light. Now, it's not the same blue light as the sunlight. It's a different frequency, but it's enough blue light for your brain to get the message, wake up, it's daytime. Upon learning this, instead of keeping my emails for the evening, I started answering my emails in the day. Because I did not want to interfere with the messages going into my brain. Your eyes are an extension of your brain, and they give messages into your eye. You see, light and dark signals are fed through the optic nerve to a control centre in your brain where your body clock is located. So one of the reasons a lot of people are having trouble with sleep is the technology, the eyes viewing the screens. So the rest is important for total healing. Number 5 is exercise. Now, you know what's happening a lot with people who have psoriasis and eczema? They're not exercising because when they exercise, the blood goes to the skin and the itch gets worse. Is that right? So a great form of exercise is swimming in cool water. You've got the cool water on the skin that prevents it from getting too hot. But exercise is important because every single part of the body needs movement, and the blood is the healer. The blood is carrying the life, the blood is carrying the oxygen, the nutrition, the water, carrying away waste, bringing white blood cells to the area. So it's finding a form of exercise that the person can do. Number 6 is proper diet. Whenever you've got any form of inflammation in the body, and with eczema and psoriasis there's inflammation, then you need to be mindful not too much sweet, even fruits. So the proper diet is high fibre. Isn't fruit high fibre? It is, but it's also high sweet. But vegetables are very high fibre, and they're low sweet. So try and concentrate more on your vegetables. Legumes. You cannot heal without protein. Your legumes, your nuts and your seeds, they're your proteins. And fats. This is particularly important for the person with psoriasis, because if you're having adequate fats in your body, that helps to nourish the skin. And the fats that are particularly important are your omega-3s. So where do we get our omega-3s from? From flaxseed. And flaxseed, linseed, basically the same thing. Chia. And walnuts. Now these are particularly high in the fats, omega-3. Now in the fat lecture that we looked at the other day, remember that it's a very thin fluid oil and it nourishes the skin very nicely. Important for adequate water, hydration and salt. your whole salt. And also thank God every day for your psoriasis. Thank God every day for your eczema. And in that way, you are trusting in God. It doesn't mean you have to like it. But when you trust in God and thank God for what's happening in your body, I believe it frees his hands. So what can you do meanwhile, waiting 2 months, eliminating these? What can you do for the itch? What can you put on your skin? Is there a herbal alternate to cortisone? No, there isn't. But there is something that is incredibly effective at stopping the itch, and that is ice. Ice. It's the best anti-inflammatory there is. So let's say the person has an itch here, ice it. It'll be incredibly painful, so you take it off. Relaxes a bit, put it back on. So on, off, and eventually it'll be more on than off till eventually you can just keep it there. I'm going to give you a story to illustrate. When I was in Alabama a couple of years ago, I got these little itchy spots on my legs because I used to walk through the forest where I was staying to get to the retreat. Chiggers. I never heard of chiggers. And they said to me, you'll be scratching for a couple of months. And someone said they looked up on the internet and it said to put nail polish on it. Well, I'm not going to put nail polish on it. So I decided not to scratch. So how did I do that? I only had to do it, sometimes I only do it twice a day. If I did it at night, I'd get through the whole night. I'd get a block of ice and I'd freeze every chigga bite. Couldn't stand the pain, you go to the next one. It gets so painful. Try it. Go to the next one. And when I'd done them all, then I'd go start again. I'd start again. So before I went to bed, it would take me about 15 minutes. I think I had about 6 chigga bites, and I just iced every one. Iced. And then I could sleep all night. I'd wake up in the morning, all feels good. I'd go on my morning run, and when I did my morning exercise, all the chigga bites would start itching. So I'd run home and get the ice. And I'd ice it again. And often they were the only 2 times in the day that I had to ice it. And it'd feel itchy, and your reaction is go straight, no, I'm not going to touch it. And within 2 weeks, I had no chigga itches at all. And they said, that's unheard of. And why did I recover so quickly? Apparently they're a little mite, that gets under the skin. Why did I recover so quickly? There's one reason. I never scratched. Now what you'll find can really compound the situation and make it very, even to get infected skin, is scratching. So you must never, ever scratch. So you have the ice, you have the freezer full of ice, you have ice packs, it's whatever. Now if it's a little one, say this little one here, let's say a little baby had it, and you put ice on, they'd almost cry. And you know what you do? You look at them with the biggest smile you've ever had and laugh. Sing, just whatever it takes. So funny putting the ice on. Do you know, the child should never see your frown. You should never see that. And just pretend that it's a game. Because if you don't, that little one will scratch. And so you really need to cover it. So it's ice. Ice, I think, is the forgotten remedy. I think you could write a whole book on ice. It's an incredible remedy. Now, next to the football field, they don't have buckets of hot water, do they? They have ice. They have ice because that gets the inflammation down. So if the skin is dry, you can certainly put coconut oil on it. But what I found is you really can't put much on it because if you poultice it, the skin gets hot, and if the skin gets hot, the itch increases. So ice, cold cloths and ice, because eventually it will go. So I was in Alabama, and I was being filmed by a lady who has filmed me several times, and she's a black American lady, and I went up and said, "Hi," and she's scratching like this. She's going like this. I said, "What's going on with you?" She said, "Oh, I've got a story for you." And she opened her phone and she showed me a picture of her, and her face was swollen and she had huge welts all over her body, all over her arms. I said, "What's this?" She said, "I was getting sicker and sicker. I was laying in my little trailer in the bed. I couldn't work. I went and stayed with a girlfriend for the weekend and everything started to clear up. I went back into the trailer and it started to get worse again." And she said, "I'm lying in the bed not knowing what to do. And I went to the doctor and he said, I've got a severe case of reactive psoriasis, and he just gave me cortisone. And she said, when it's really bad, I put it on, but I try not to because it comes back worse." But she's lying in bed and she looked at the wall at the end of her bed and she noticed something black growing up the wall. And she noticed that it wasn't there the day before, and every day it was growing up a little bit more. The other side of her bedroom was the bathroom. And she had a leaking pipe in the wall. What had given her this? Mold. It was mold. So she got out of the trailer, and the formula, I love the formula, I found it in the Ministry of Healing. It says, in the case of sickness, the cause must be ascertained. See the word must? That's not perhaps. The cause must be ascertained. Unhealthful conditions change. She had to get out of there. You'd almost just want to put a match to that trailer because it was just so infested with mold. So in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. Wrong habits, unhealthful conditions changed, wrong habits corrected, then nature is to be assisted in her efforts to expel impurities and re-establish right conditions back in the system. Did you know that the skin, it's almost out? If it's in the liver, it's a lot more work. If it's in the kidneys, that's a lot more work. If it's in the colon, but if it's on the skin, it's nearly out. It's like sweeping the house and then leaving everything at the door. That's the skin, it's the door out. So actually skin is one of the easiest to heal because you're nearly out. You know what the cortisone does? The cortisone is like putting all the waste, all the dust and the rubbish at the door and getting a blower and blowing it back into the house. That's what the cortisone does. So we've got 4 organs of elimination in the body. So the 4 organs of elimination are important to assess when you're looking at skin diseases. So number 1 organ of elimination is your skin. The skin is an organ of elimination. And so often you will get skin diseases happening because the body's eliminating. Number 2 organ of elimination is your lungs. That's why to help your skin, you must be breathing in fresh air. The 3rd organ of elimination is your kidneys. So make sure you're drinking enough water, because if your kidneys are working well and you're breathing lots of fresh air, it takes a load off the lungs. The 4th organ of elimination is the colon. And if the colon isn't evacuating properly, some of the waste can come out of the skin. Ew. So one of the ways to help the skin is to increase the elimination from lungs, kidneys, and colon. So how can you increase elimination from the colon? Drink lots of water, have a high fibre diet, exercise every day to stimulate blood supply to the colon, make sure you're resting every night, stop the dehydrating foods. And the dehydrating foods, certainly the sugars are dehydrated, but the dehydrators are caffeine, alcohol, drugs. cigarettes. Make sure sun gets on the colon so it works well. Last night I gave you a tea that stimulates the colon to work. So when you stimulate the colon to be evacuating, ideally, twice a day is ideally, once is a must. Make sure you're breathing the fresh air and drink lots of water, little by little by little. And that can help the lung, that can help the skin. So the skin, it's almost out. So when I said to this lady, she's still scratching. She's been out of that trailer for 6 months now, and she's still scratching. So what are we got to do now? Yeah, she's got to stop scratching. But I said, are you eating peanuts? She said, yes. You eating dairy? She said, no. Are you eating wheat? Lots. Are you eating oats? Yes. Are you having sugar? Oh, I try not to. So I said, eliminate these, and because there's a mold factor there, she had to go onto an anti-fungal diet. So what's the antifungal diet? Well, at first, in my book, I've got stage 1 and stage 2 antifungal diet. So stage 1, the only fruit is Granny Smith apple and, avocados are fine. Granny Smith apple and grapefruit. So they're the only 2 fruits. She said, that's all? I said, oh, if you want to stop scratching. I said, show me your tongue. Whoo-wee. Looked like white carpet. I said, yeah, it's time. Now, she'd been scratching for months. She was out of the trailer. But all that fungus that she'd been breathing in, that now had to get out of her body. She didn't realise that these things were feeding it. And I also suggested some killers of yeast. So what are the killers of yeast? I've got some good news. There are things that will kill yeast and they won't kill you. Garlic. If you can handle it. Olive leaf extract. Olive leaf extract is quite well known now. It has antifungal properties. But something that's a lot easier to get in the US is grapefruit seed extract. Have you ever eaten grapefruit and bitten on the seed? Whew, you'll think the grapefruit's sweet. Now, they are strong volatile oils that have fungal killing properties. Now, if you do get the grapefruit seed extract, don't put a few drops down your throat or you'll probably burn all the skin away. It's very strong. So what do? You just put a few drops in a little bit of water and throw it down. Now, our body gets used to things. So what I suggest people do is they alternate. They might do a week on garlic, a week on olive leaf extract, a week on grapefruit seed extract. Another herb that is a fungal killer is, there are a few essential oils. Oregano essential oil, oregano, thyme, and also clove. They're all very strong. And because they're essential oils, please only start with a couple of drops. So this is really 4, 5, and 6 different things you can do. And number 7 is Portiaco. Portiaco is a South American herb, strong cell proliferator action. Now, with her severe eczema, the mold was a factor. But sometimes it is not a factor. So sometimes it is not necessary to do that, but it was certainly with her, who had been living in this mouldy caravan, or you call it a trailer, and breathing in that mould. And that's why it's important. I hope you can see the why. It's way down here. And that's why it's important to investigate, when did this start? When did it all happen? It's like the lady that said she had asthma from the age of 5. I said, did anything happen at 5? She said, we moved into a different house and we just love this house because in the lounge room, little mushrooms grew in the carpet. Oh my. Now she was suffering more because she's way down there, she's a little girl, whereas the adults are up here getting more fresh air. So it's not always easy to find the cause. Sometimes there can be a whole lot of little factors that you would not even hardly notice. But in every case, there's slightly different factors that come together. So with most people, they will find implementing these, eliminating these, as with the man from Saudi Arabia, and his eczema was totally healed. But with this lady, she was out of the mouldy house, but she had to get it out of her body. So remember, alternate. The body gets used to things, so it's good to alternate different herbs. How long will you do it for? Well, until you stop scratching and the tongue is nice and pink. The tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. Do you remember when doctors used to look at your tongue? Yeah. Not so much now. I guess because a lot of the drugs are putting a mould waste into the body. A lady rang me, her baby had eczema. I said, is your baby breastfed? She said, yes. So what would cause that eczema? She said it began after vaccination. So this brings in the chemicals. She said, we are not vaccinating her again. See, every parent vaccinates their baby because they want the best for their baby. But if every parent said to the doctor, I will vaccinate my baby if you sign this piece of paper that you will take responsibility if there are any side effects, and if every parent investigated the ingredients in the vaccine, that they would have second thoughts. Remember, we have an amazing immune system that was created by God to heal us. So the baby was breastfed. I said, are you eating dairy? She said, yes. Are you eating wheat? Yes. She wasn't having peanuts. She wasn't having refined sugar. I said, stop the dairy and stop the wheat and the oats. 1 month later, she emailed me the baby. The baby still had eczema. She said, I've stopped the food and it's still there. I said, yeah, I'm so sorry. But it takes 2 months. Be patient, use the cold cloth. 1 month later, she sent me a photograph of her baby, totally clear. No more eczema. So if a mother says, but I don't want to stop that food, well, she might have to put her baby on the goat's milk. But I've seen also quite a few babies who had eczema, who when they went from the cow's milk formula to the goat's milk formula, then it cleared up. So many babies develop asthma and eczema too from the cow's milk formula. I also was talking to a lady and she said that her daughter had a little boy who had eczema. And the little boy was, I think, 12 months of age. So her daughter took her son to a paediatrician. And the paediatrician said, stop these foods. Oh, that cheered my heart. So that there are some doctors, there are some specialists who have investigated, like Dr. Robert Thompson, who wrote the book, The Calcium Lie. He was about to get out of medicine. He said, people just aren't getting better. But 7 years is a long time. So he decided to do a nutrition course and his eyes were opened. I have a friend who is a physician from Fiji. She came to work with us for a few weeks to see what we do. She's back in Fiji now. They call her the nutritional doctor. The most sensible thing when a person is not well is to work with the healing powers of the body. But remember the formula. Number one, ascertain the cause. You have to go way back in the history. I dig deep. I dig very deep. I was at a health retreat when I was doing my thesis for my nutrition course. This is, about 12 years ago now. And I had to do it at another health retreat. I couldn't do it with the people that come to our retreat. I had to be under a naturopath, and so I just sat in every consultation, and the naturopath would ask questions. And every few minutes I'd say, can I ask a question? How long have you had that? When did it all start? So what was happening around that time? And I'd make my notes. The naturopath would just look at me. Next person would come in. Just a question. How old were you when that started? Where were you living? And I just ask. I just dig. It's like in the garden. You've got to dig deep to get those roots out. I've been a gardener for a year. Do you know that we had people book into our retreat because of the questions that I asked? Because you've got to, if you don't find the cause, you don't have a full understanding. Now you can't always find every cause, and you can't always change the cause. Like this lady that got asthma after moving into the house with, mushrooms in the carpet. She was now in her 50s. I was just intrigued that the asthma had started when she was 5, because if it is an allergy, it often starts when the baby goes off the breast milk and starts eating wheat and dairy. Often it'll start there, or maybe it'll start after vaccination. So I was intrigued that her asthma didn't begin till she was 5. So then you investigate that. But I'm inquisitive. I want to know why, and I want to know where it started. And I was talking to a lady one day. She rang me up. She was a friend of a friend, and she was telling me of a problem she had, and I'm going through everything. I always go through the laws. Everything looked fine. And I'm racking my brains. Wow, what could this be? She was getting dizzy and fainting spells. And then she said, I have a holiday for 3 weeks every year, and I don't have the problem at all. Where do you go for your holiday? See, her problem was stress. And I said, you've got to get another job. She said, another job? Unless you want to keep fainting all day long. You've got to find out the factors that are coming in. And then another lady, I went through all the laws, I could find no problem. And then I felt impressed to ask her about her teeth. And she had a bad tooth. If you've got a bad tooth, it's constantly leaching poisons into your bloodstream and into your gut. Remember the whisper? A bad tooth is more than a whisper. So a bad taste in your mouth, you got to go to the dentist and find out what's going on there. And you saw last night in the hormone lecture, sometimes it can be a hormonal imbalance. That's one area that's not often addressed. Every woman with any problem in her reproductive organs, there's a hormone factor there. And so addressing that. So we have seen many people totally heal from eczema and psoriasis. And if someone stops wheat and after 1 month they take another slice of bread, well, guess what? They've got to start again. So that's why I say, you don't necessarily start this minute. You go home and you get the kitchen cupboards right. One lady said, Barbara, you'd be so proud of me. I went home and I emptied all my kitchen cupboards out and gave them to the poor people next door. All the sugar and the candies and the... I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. And so it's a good idea to get your pantry well stocked, your freezer well stocked, because when you come home and you haven't eaten a good lunch and you're hungry, you're just going to go for the fast food. And what's the fast food? It's bread, crackers, 2-minute noodles, the quick things there. Well, go for your gluten-free crackers and avocado and tomato. That's fairly quick. So it's also good to know your options, to know what you've got available there. Are there any questions? I think we've got a good 25 minutes for questions. Yes.
Is there something that we could diffuse into the air that would help with a living situation with mold?
Okay, the question is there something you can put into the air, diffuse into the air when there's living with mold? Well, I think it's important to remember what the Bible says. The house has to be destroyed. You know, you've really got to get out of there. I met one lady and she said, my teenage sons had sinus, chest colds. She said, we got the house assessed and the basement had mold all in the walls. She said they had to totally demolish our house. It was beyond saving. See, if the foundation's not good, nothing much is good. We've got a series at home in our library, our DVD library. It's called Is Your House Killing You? And there are seven DVDs, and in nearly every case there was a mold factor. Now, if you put these essential oils in, these are all anti-fungal essential oils, and they will help somewhat, but you've really got to get out of the place.
My question is about shingles. How do we help people with shingle onsets or related types of things?
Shingles is a difficult one. My husband had shingles in his eye. Oh yeah. These little spots started coming up on his forehead, and we wondered what it was, and his eye was a little bit sore, and ended up being shingles. Apparently there is a medication that they offer that if you get in there quickly, it can turn it around. I do not know that. I don't know anything about it, and so that's to investigate. So the only thing that would help Michael, he really just had to endure it, was, and would you believe it, we're travelling to England. We'd left Australia. We stayed a night in Thailand, and then we're travelling to England, and he just laid his head on my lap on the plane, and I just had ice. I just iced the whole area the whole time, and that numbed it somewhat. Now, we could not try this on him, but if you have shingles on the torso, I know in Australia there's a capsicum cream that you can buy in a chemist. Do you call it a chemist or a pharmacist? Yeah, it's a capsicum cream. Now that tingles a bit at first when it goes on, but cayenne pepper has an analgesic effect. One of the actives in cayenne pepper is analgesic, which means it can dull the pain. Michael found that hot and colds on his forehead also helped, but it really is something that you just have to let it run its course. I have read that high-dose IV vitamin C can actually reduce it. So there's a few things.
Okay, go ahead. All right. With the ice, I mean, you can't put it on too long in the body before it, doesn't it burn your skin or do something?
Well, if you put it on the body, it certainly hurts.
Yeah.
That's why you have to go on, off.
Okay.
On, off. On, off. And once you can bear it on, you will just leave it there for 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
By then the whole area is deadened, so there's no need to even have it on after that. But it's a good idea for everyone to try it. You know, if you're watching no, we don't watch the news anymore, do we? Because it's maybe watching a very interesting documentary on nature. Have some ice and just see how you can do it. You go on and off until you can bear it.
Yeah, I have used lysine. Lysine doesn't cure it, but it dries up the blisters.
Okay, well, lysine is an amino acid, and lysine is a remedy for cold sores. So maybe that's why it does it, because the amino acid cold sore, the amino acid lysine, if you take that when a cold sore's developing, it will stop its develop. So that is very interesting. So lysine can help. And I know in Australia you can buy products called Lipsine, and it's just lysine. You take it in the tablet form.
I have two questions. One of them was from Monday night's Reversing Diabetes. We have a lot of information from some of the other, like Uchi Pines and places, that have talked about oils and fats being as bad as sugar for diabetics. So that was a question I have.
Okay. The only oils and fats that could be dangerous for diabetes is your altered fats. So they're your polyunsaturated fats, your margarines. So we have had incredible turnarounds with diabetes, and I think I related a few stories to you. And they are eating avocados, nuts and seeds, and some olive oil.
Okay.
So we have not found that the healthy oils interfere with the recovery.
Okay. Second question is, we have a friend who's had C. diff for over 2 months, and you were talking about the gut biome last night. And they've been on antibiotics and...
So what do they have?
C. diff.
Clostridium difficile.
You'll have to explain, I'm sorry.
Clostridium difficile, it's bacterial infection that comes after a whole bunch of antibiotics. And
Where's the infection?
Diarrhea, colon.
Okay. Well,
it's highly contagious.
Unfortunately, the antibiotics are killing off all the good stuff in the colon.
Yes, makes it worse. Yeah.
Yep. So what they are far better to do is to take slippery elm. If it's really bad diarrhea, take slippery elm. Now, what they can put in the slippery elm is golden seal. Golden seal is anti-staphylococcic, anti-streptococcic, antibacterial, antibiotic, antifungal, antiviral, amazing herb. So what they can do is, and we have a mix that we use for cases like that, so I'll write down the formula. So it's 8-part slippery elm, and it's 1 part golden seal, and 1 part myrrh. So you buy the slippery elm as a powder, you buy the golden seal as a powder, and the myrrh is a gum resin, but it can be bought as a powder. So you mix that up in a jar. So the dose is 1 teaspoon to usually about half a cup of hot water. So if I was that person, I would stop the antibiotics immediately. It sounds like they've been on them for a while, so they're obviously not doing it, and I would say to the point there it's probably causing more damage, and let those herbs do their work. If the diarrhea is bad, he can even take a cup of that every hour. And usually by the end of the day there'll be relief. Now the best thing to do if someone has chronic diarrhea is to just have thick vegetable stews, just cooked vegetables. It's not forever, it's just until it heals.
My question is on rest. I have a brother that works nights, and I know you're going to say tell him to quit his job, but what else?
Someone has to work nights. So my suggestion is that everyone just do a little bit. Can he arrange it so that he can doesn't have to do so many nights? How long has he been doing nights? Oh, okay, 5 or 6 months. No. we just have to sleep. We have to sleep. And I know when I was nursing, there was one shift that started at 10. I do 10 till 7 in the morning. That if I was required to do such a thing now, I would sleep from about 5 o'clock in the evening to about 9:30. So I'd get a few of those early hours. And then when I came home, I would go straight to bed and get about 5 or 6 hours there. So in the middle of the day, I would be awake, I'd have my main meal, then I'd let the sun go into my eyes, which resets the circadian rhythm. I would make sure I was well hydrated, no caffeine, and do some good high-intensity exercise in the day.
Back to the idea or the discussion on shingles. I personally have experienced shingles, and I have found that B12, liquid B12 under the tongue, has, when my face or start feeling shingles coming on, I take B12.
Well,
and it wards it off. I mean, it just is a blessing.
Thank you for that. That's good to know.
And the second thing is, have you addressed? I mean, there's discussion about microwave ovens.
Okay, well, let me tell you about Russia. They banned them in 1976. And if you have a microwave and want to be convinced of their danger, microwave some water and then choose a plant that you're going to water with that microwaved water. And if you water it with microwaved water twice a week, it'll probably be dead in a couple of weeks. Just a little experiment to see how dangerous it is. Microwave oven does have a use in your laundry to warm up your heat packs. I can't think of any other use. One of the reasons why it is so bad that it causes the molecules in the food to bump together like this, and that's what causes it to warm, and it warms from the inside out. If you ever put a pastry in there, it just goes soggy. But what it does is it destroys the nutrients and it creates molecules that your body doesn't know, so it's actually dangerous to use a microwave for your food. I've got to go with this.
Go ahead. Oh, Barbara, I wanted to thank you. Last night I got a call that my horse got caught in a fence and had a big gash, and I thought, oh, what would Barbara do? And so I remembered cayenne, and we stuffed it full of cayenne, but I didn't know it was a pain reliever, so
Yes.
that's exciting.
Yeah.
My question, though, is...
Now, it doesn't feel like that at first, but it eventually does.
It did stop the bleeding, though.
It does, yeah.
My question is grounding pads. Do you recommend them? Have you looked into them for sleeping, putting them on your bed?
Much depends on where you live and the environment around and the wires that are around. I don't use them, but I do like to do a little bit of grounding by walking barefoot as much as I can. Not in the city, but on some nice grass that doesn't have any bindies or barbs in it, and dogs haven't done their droppings on there. So you sort of have to choose that. But I do understand that it can play a role in some areas.
I have a question here. First of all, you mentioned about, I'm back here, shingles. I had an 8-year-old who wound up having weird track of blisters, and I'm going, something's going on here. Sure enough, it was shingles. I wound up getting lubricant cream, which was a lotion without alcohol, mixing it with cayenne and coating his skin. I let him start school, but I wrapped him in gauze. And I said, when you get a fever, you need to stay home. But 8 inches wide all around the half of his body with solid raw flesh. And putting that cayenne with a little bit of cream, he was able to go to school. This is a child, but when he got a fever, he got to stay home. But it was amazing. It took the pain out, no other medication. And next, I have a question regarding skin cancers. With the repeating, keep coming back, what can you do?
I'm just going to write a book first. It's called Curing with Cayenne by Sam Beiser. It's an ebook, and it shows the remarkable properties of cayenne. So it's by a medical journalist, and his name's Sam Beiser. So what was the next question? Skin cancer. Are you familiar with the black salve or cansema?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
we did that, and you're supposed to do a very small section. We didn't, and I almost killed my husband with pain.
Yeah.
So I did think about dipping him in it, but I just
you have to
we
do
did a small
you
portion.
have to do a very small amount of the black salve or cansema, and it will eat out cancers. And you apply it once, and then you cover it. And you leave it for 24 hours, and when you take it off, if it is a cancer, it'll be all pussy in the middle and red and raised on the outside, and people get a bit afraid when they see that, but it's just the cansema burning it out. Because if you burn it out with nitrogen with the doctor, it'll just look as bad.
We did that, yes.
But what you'll find is that within probably a couple of days, it'll start shrinking right down, and then it usually dries out, and usually at about 10 days, the core will fall out. Then you're left with a bit of a crater in the skin where the skin cancer fell out, and little by little that'll fill out. Now, sometimes only one application's necessary, and it depends how deep it is. If you don't get it with one application, it just means it's deeper. And so you might need to do it every 3 months. It just depends on the body's response.
Thank you. We've done that twice. We're going to get ready for a third time.
Okay, yeah,
Thank
do
you.
it again. And between times, you can just put castor oil on it.
My question is about sweeteners. I was wondering if stevia is acceptable instead of sugar as far as avoiding formation of acid.
Yes, stevia is a very viable option. Stevia can have a bitter aftertaste if you use too much. Some people say, I don't like stevia. I said, you use too much.
I know, I learned that.
It's hard to believe that a 1/16 of a teaspoon is equal to 2 teaspoons of sugar. Yep. It's a very light, it's a delicious sweetener. Again, it only gets the bitter aftertaste if you overdo it.
Thank you.
Earlier in the first message, you talked about the ginger for the joints and the garlic, but I didn't hear anything about onion, and I'm just wondering, do you still use the onion poultices, and when do you use them? And if you could do me a favor and mention the proper storage of onions for me?
Well, we talked about onion when we talked about the immune system. I forget what night that was. And we talked about the onion syrup and also the cooked onion for the ear and the chopped onion on the bottom of the feet for colds. Because onion is a drawer, it is important, if you're only using half an onion, not to wrap the other half in plastic, because the onion will draw all the chemicals out of the plastic into the onion. So if I'm going to use only half an onion, the other half I'll just sit on a china plate and maybe use it for the next meal, but I don't keep it any longer than that.
On the sweetener issue, monk fruit. What about monk fruit?
Monk fruit. I'm not familiar with monk fruit.
I was recently introduced to a treatment called colloidal silver or nano silver, several other names, ionic silver. And my understanding is that this works by disrupting the cellular membrane of the bacteria or the organism that it destroys. In my introduction and talking to people about this, I understand that some people drink as much as a cup a day. And it's supposed to be safe to huge amounts.
Let me tell you
If this actually damages cell membranes and acts as an antibiotic, what effect would this have on the gut bacteria?
They used to use colloidal silver before antibiotics, and you've heard that they say that the kings, the wealthy families had blue blood, and the reason is because they ate with silver spoons. So eating with the silver spoons and the silver forks, they were getting a form of colloidal silver. And they say that it protected them in times of plagues. What colloidal silver does is it interferes with a one-celled bacteria's ability to take up oxygen. And that's how it kills it. A lady said to me once, she said, I take olive leaf extract every day. I said, don't do that. Keep it for when you need it. Don't use all your ammunition in times of sunshine or when it's time for war, you've got nothing left. And it's the same with the colloidal silver. The colloidal silver should be kept, and it could be taken for a week because it can be a killer. The problem is that when you make colloidal silver, my daughter has a machine and there are two electrodes that go together that I think they have silver and put it into the water, but it doesn't keep for very long. So I don't understand how they can keep this colloidal silver. So the best way to have it is if you just make it. So I wouldn't advise drinking it every day. I would advise just keeping it for when you need it.
I have a close friend who doesn't have I'm over here on the. I have a close friend who has low iron in her blood. And is there something that she can eat?
Well, let me tell you something about iron. It's very interesting. Iron is bound up in food and it needs acid to free it or liberate it from food. So if someone has low hydrochloric acid, that can be the cause of their anemia. So they need to boost their hydrochloric acid levels.
Is there something she can eat to do that, or?
And the other is that if a woman is having a heavy blood loss with her periods, so you've got to look at the cause of the anemia. The two main causes of anemia is low hydrochloric acid or heavy blood loss. So if there's heavy blood loss every month, then she would need to go on the Anna's Wild Yam Cream and balance her hormones so she's not losing so much blood, and then she won't have the anemic problem.
Yeah, she is. I'm going to recommend the Wild Yam Cream to her. She's recently had a hysterectomy, so the blood flow, the blood loss isn't there, and yet
should be stopped.
She's still being recommended to take so much iron, and she's taking iron in a mixture sick.
Well, it could be low hydrochloric acid.
Okay.
But she will need the Anna's cream if she's lost her uterus, because the cause of losing the uterus would be a hormonal imbalance.
Yes.
And to boost your hydrochloric acid levels, there is an extract from beetroot that you can buy in a tablet form called betaine hydrochloride. And betaine hydrochloride, that's in my book, the stomach chapter, How to Boost Your Hydrochloric Acid. So that can be taken. Also, a simpler one is just drinking the juice of a lemon before each meal, or having a little cayenne pepper in a bit of water before every meal.
Barbara, could you repeat what you said about skin cancer, the two things? I couldn't understand what they were.
I'll write them down.
Thank you.
It's, and you can Google this. It's either called cancema or black salve. And basically it's away at skin cancers, but you have to be careful just to do a little bit, otherwise you'll get too much of a reaction. You're better to eat at the skin cancer like a mouse eats at a piece of cheese. And we have burnt off hundreds of skin cancers. If you Google it, you'll probably get the most horrific pictures you've ever seen. And they're usually of people who put too much on, got an absolute reaction. It'd be like someone having a nose job, and you take a photo of them the morning they wake up after the operation and their face is black. You know, and it's like if a doctor burns out a skin cancer, of course it's going to be red and inflamed. So once the cansema is applied, while it's burning out the cancer, it is going to be red and inflamed, but it's part of the process.
I have a couple questions over here. On distilled water, I've heard both sides, where distilled water is very useful when you're treating disease, and then I've heard the other side of people saying, you know, if you drink distilled water, it's going to remove minerals from your body.
I believe that God meant us to just drink pure water. I don't drink distilled water. I don't think there's a need to drink it. I do know that some people, when they're fasting, they might drink distilled water, but I don't believe there is a need to.
Okay. And then my other couple questions are in regards to sleep. Is it, do you feel it's beneficial to get more than 9 hours, or is
No, eight is enough.
Or 8, I mean, more than 8?
Children need more.
Okay. But because
ideally,
sometimes I feel like I need more than 8.
Well, have a little more.
Okay. And then this is also in regards to sleep. I've gotten in the habit of putting I wasn't always a phone person, but I have an app on my phone that plays Spirit of Prophecy books, and so I'll set that next to my nightstand. And you had mentioned about EMF issues, and I've kind of gotten away from that, but maybe you could address that.
Well, if you put it on flight mode, so it's not picking up signals, and as long as you have it 2 foot away from your head, you know, you could get away with that.
What about I just bought a little Wi-Fi speaker. Could I put it further away from my bed and then maybe have the little speaker next to me? Or I'm not that familiar with EMF issues. It's like a Bluetooth speaker. I know.
Is that it?
I think we're nearly time. Maybe one more, okay.
Is Bragg's amino acid okay? Bragg's amino acid?
I don't use it. Okay. It is better than soy sauce. It's even a little bit better than tamari, but what I use for flavour is good quality vegetables. I use a very good quality olive oil. I use a very good quality salt and fresh herbs, or some good quality dried herbs, and I find that you've got all the flavour you need then. Okay, thank you everyone.
We want to welcome you for tomorrow morning. You're welcome to join us here in the Hayden Lake Seventh-day Adventist Church at 9:30 till noon. Barbara O'Neill will be presenting as well tomorrow, and then you're all welcome for a fellowship meal following the service. So I'd like to close with prayer. Invite you to bow your head with me. Our gracious Father in heaven, we thank you again for the blessings of health. Thank you for the healing properties in which you've given us. And we ask for your presence, which brings healing, because we petition the great physician, our Creator. In the name of your Son, your precious Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen. God be with you. We'll see you tomorrow morning.